Hey, hello, and welcome to StarkNet's podcast, where we talk about what gets us excited about technology in general, blockchain in particular, and validity rollups specifically. I'm your host, Henri, and in today's episode, we receive GuiltyGyoza, founder of Topology and general Cairo wizard. We talk about simulated worlds, blockchains as a medium to express creativity, and advancing science through provable code. I hope you enjoy it. Okay. Hello, everyone. Guilty, thank you for joining us today.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
GuiltyGyoza, I think you're fairly recognized amongst our community. I think everyone knows about your Twitter profiles and some of your achievements, but can you present a bit who you are and what you're working on?
Yeah, sure. I'm running a company called Topology at the moment. It's in the StarkNet space. Before Topology, I did a string of different things outside of crypto. We all came into crypto from different directions.
Right? But I'm interested. What were those things? Like, what did you study initially?
Yeah, I'm in the electrical engineering domain. For a very long time, both in my graduate school and in the previous work that I did, I was designing ASICs. So that's application-specific ICs, and specifically for accelerating deep learning.
That's very, it's a domain where there were a lot of innovations in the past few years, right? I mean, if I understand correctly, from that specific domain, we're reaching the point where transistors can't get much smaller. So we have to think in new dimensions, either make bigger chips or make them 3D. So you were working on that?
Yeah, there are many very bold attempts to carry on Moore's law, and the particular family of attempts that I worked on for 2-3 years was in this domain of using photonics to accelerate deep learning, and this is a very, very precise positioning. Photonics are great for carry out linear computations. And it just so happens that in machine learning and deep learning in particular, there's a lot of linear computation. And so they're a perfect marriage. And yeah, that was my prior focus, learn a lot from that domain.
Super cool. And so you switched to the blockchain space at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I learned about Ethereum very late in 2019. I think from L1 space perspective, I was late to the game. Still, I was fascinated when I first read Satoshi's white paper, as I believe a lot of people here read that paper in the first time, and I think their view of the world just changed, right? And the same happened to me. And what I think what impressed me even more is when I came across the DAO talk. It was completely coincidental. It was just on YouTube, and their recommendation engine surfaced a video of Vitalik talking about DAOs, just the ideal of DAOs very early on. And I look at the page, and I was immediately grasped. For a very long time, I have been very curious about building autonomous systems, whether that's autonomous agents or just in general systems that allow for things to happen in a richer way without necessarily human intervention or manual work. And when I learned about DAO, it was just it sounded like magic to me.
Exciting. So you heard first about Ethereum, then you went to the Bitcoin white paper, then back to DAOs. That must have been like did you study this on the weekend? How did you my question specifically is, what was the first thing that made you think like, oh, wow, this looks fun? And what was the thing that made you go all the way like, oh, wow, this is really cool. I want to spend my time on this? What was the trigger?
Right. I think there are multiple triggers, and they happen over time. It just pushes me deeper and deeper down this hole. One of the first triggers might be learning about Ethereum, Bitcoin also, but Ethereum being this medium where everyone can program on and interact with, and that is decoupled from the entities that are running with it, in a sense, as in it's not tied to single entities and a lot of dependencies, and that upon learning that, it was a revelation. It almost meant to me that like there will be less repetitive work, because now when all projects and teams are building on the same substrate, in a sense, competition is fiercer, but that also means that innovation is much faster. And in contrary, right, you have these fragmented systems outside of blockchain, more or less. And there's a lot of opportunities for arbitrage. Right? You can go to certain geographies where technology has not penetrated yet, and you can start business there, doing basically the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. But with blockchain, the penetration is straightforward. Whenever you can access blockchain through various means, different kinds of wallets, you have access to the same infrastructure, and that just speeds up innovation. To me, that's a change in paradigm. And I think that's one of the first triggers. I realized that I'm not just choosing a company to work on, I'm choosing a medium to work on. It's akin to, do I use computer or not? Probably many decades ago.
I see what you mean. It's
choosing a technology.
It's a different substrate on which to build on. It's computation, and it doesn't, I mean, in a way, it's independent on the physical substrate it operates on at a given moment in time. I saw somebody once saying something which sounds funny to me, that, when we talk about artificial general or autonomous intelligence, autonomous artificial intelligence, we often think of the Terminator, who is taking a gun and killing all humans and everything. But life didn't start with humans. It started with much simpler forms of life. And in a way, Bitcoin and Ethereum may be the first fully autonomous artificial intelligence. They're very basic, right? They just feed on electricity or on human cooperation, and they move one block at a time, but they're totally outside the reach or control of any human or group of human. They're virtually independent from us. And that's a fun perspective.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree. And to follow this line of thinking, another trigger for me would be to learning about DAOs and extrapolating from DAO as a company. To me, it's obvious that DAO is, you can localize it as it's almost a life form of itself. And so I came across, I think, early pioneers that were doing DAO as artists, autonomous artists, and they're just making decisions on their own, and they have their own balance to incentivize behaviors to grow themselves, etc. And there are various people, a lot of them are French, I realized, that are pushing this direction. It was a wonderful experiment.
Are there a fun DAO experiment that you're looking at today that you like?
Right. I think that, and in a certain sense, the space has evolved. In the early days of Ethereum, there was more of there's a nature of just you can be whimsical, you can break boundaries, and there's not much implications, as in people's livelihood and decisions are not based on you. I think over time, and that's the consequence of mass adoption, right? More people are making decisions based on your protocol, your project, and that, in a sense, limits the degree of freedom you have in terms of exploration. So I would think that, at least in L1 space, the early days were, I think, wonderful days where people do crazy experiments. But now we can talk about layer 2 space. Eventually, I think that risk curve has moved, and so.
That's interesting. You were saying earlier that you joined the blockchain space late to the party in 2019. I mean, it means you've spent basically 2 to 3 years here, which is not
that little, things move a lot. So, and you're right, the space has matured and it has moved from a place where there's a lot of experimentation to a place where there's a lot of capital and a lot of things at stake. And so moving is a bit, it may be a bit difficult. And so, yeah, you're mentioning layer twos. You're working mostly on StarkNet today, right? So can you share a bit why?
Yeah. The straightforward answer chronologically was I came across Parama's work in Dope Wars, and that started everything.
What made you think like, oh wow, this is cool?
I think for a very long time, I have been searching for entries into the blockchain space that I feel I can contribute to in a fundamental way. And because of my background and also my interests, I didn't find, in general, financial protocols something that I can really contribute to. That's why over the past, from 2019 to 2021, I was more on the sideline, learning the basics, but not really, creating protocols and just doing more serious stuff. When I came across Parama's project, and it was the GitHub repo was just saying very explicitly, this is a game engine written in Cairo, and this is extensible, etc. And it immediately caught my attention. And I realized that.
This is me.
There's a paradigm change now. Yeah, blockchain over time will shift to a completely different use case. It won't carry so much of a significance exclusively in the financial domain. It will mean something else, and that might be much more interesting to a lot more people. So that Parama's work was the origin of that.
I understand. So it basically opened up the perspective that you can do more than finance, and so his angle that you liked was gaming. You're a gamer yourself, right?
Yeah, I play a lot of games. So it caught my attention. Actually, before, for many months in 2021, I have been working with a couple close friends to try to start an AI game studio. We're all gamers and we see the potential of AI. And so it's natural for us to want to find overlaps. And already technologies are penetrating game industry in different layers, when it comes to tooling, asset generation, etc. But we were trying to see if AI can change and bring about completely new game mechanics in games, not just playing assisting role, but actually shaping the game mechanics of the game. And there are a couple companies doing this. It's a very challenging undertaking, and most importantly, I think game industry outside blockchain, game industry is unless you work for indie studio or where you are an indie developer, it's quite a capital intensive process. And also the AI industry is actually the same. And so it's quite hard to bootstrap projects in these industries. And this is direct opposite to blockchain. In blockchain, you bootstrap things very naturally.
Yeah, but why is it more capital intensive in AI and video games? Is it because you need a lot of machines, or is it because you need a lot of brain
power? For the kind of interactivity and AI behavior, etc. Generative animation, etc. That requires a lot of training data, and that requires a lot of machines to run the training, and also inference that's fast enough for real time generation. So it's the reliance on the whole infrastructure, and that cuts into any considerations on business model, right? And so it's quite hard to bootstrap that. Yeah.
I see your point, and you're right. In the blockchain world, it's a bit easier. It is easier to bootstrap because you have less cost dependent on capital.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, super cool. So you read Parama's note, and you were like, oh, this is interesting. What was the next step for you? How did you start saying, okay, let's write a smart contract? What was the first smart contract you wrote? Was it in Solidity, in Cairo, in Bitcoin, Cardano?
Sorry, no Cardano. I wrote very simple ERC 721 contracts at East Denver in 2020. That was a long time ago. I think my first serious endeavor in writing smart contracts is in the Cairo space, and that was basically learning about the Cairo game engine, and contacting Parama, and he was just very welcoming. I immediately joined the repo as a very minor contributor and just learned by doing, and with this benevolence, and also Parama knows his blog that in the early days really was the most comprehensive material. I think it still is among the best materials. I quickly learned the rope, and a couple weeks later, I had all these ideas in physics and AI stuff, and so I, in a sense, jumped ship and started doing my things.
Great. So you started applying what you were familiar with, so AI and physics, but coding it in Cairo. People who write smart contracts, for example, on in the EVM, in Solidity, it's kind of like writing a program for a very specific chip that has very specific capacities. So you very quickly get the reflex to limit yourself and optimize memory and know what you're doing. You went straight from, not smart contract programming to programming smart contract in a language that is different, where there are less boundaries, but still there are boundaries when you're on the blockchain, right? And I'm curious, what's your experience switching from whatever language you were using before to Cairo, which is a particular beast in and of itself, and switching to writing smart contract? What was the experience? What was surprising? What was exciting? And I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that I don't see much hardware engineer in the crypto space for some reasons. The programming languages that I'm familiar with, besides smart contract language, are Verilog and Python, and they're really two ends of an entire spectrum. Verilog is the low-level language we use to design hardware, and it's working directly with the constraints, synchronized circuits and all that stuff, timing paths, a lot of the constraints, price consideration when it comes to hardware design. And I work with Python. Python is a language for, in a sense, that's very friendly for lazy people. You write things whimsically, and there's little consequence. Very good for prototyping. Cairo, in a sense, almost married the two for me. It's working with constraints, and in the ZKP space, you guys adopt this language akin to hardware design. So that coincidentally makes it very friendly to me. And also, Cairo is designed in a way that adopts certain syntactic sugar in Python. So it's a very strange coincidence for me, honestly, when I learned about Cairo.
Cool. So Cairo, writing provable smart contracts is, writing provable code that you can prove executed correctly, is a tool that goes way beyond writing smart contracts. We use it for smart contracts because it allows scaling the blockchain in StarkNet, right? But I know you thought a lot more about this, right? What does it mean to be able to prove that you run a program? I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that. I know you recently had a blog post about decentralizing patent offices and having provable science and provable execution. I was curious if you could talk a bit about this.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I completely agree that the implication is huge, and really kudos to the team that invented this language that makes ZKP systems exponentially more accessible to people. To my idea, I wrote an essay on with the title "Decentralized Patent Office," and the idea is that a lot of the innovations that human does. I think there's a thinking here where the inventor of some new knowledge wants to capture some upside of that, and also the inventor wants to be recognized as the inventor of such knowledge, and this basically plays into human desire, right? Wanting to be recognized for what they do, wanting to voice and will their existence into the world, etc. So this really plays into the inventor mindset. They want to be seen as inventing this and being recognized, and being recognized, right? We have provable computation that allows us to, in a neutral way, in a very objective way, quantify and assert that something happens because someone invents it, or something happens because of someone's contribution. All these statements when it comes to inventorship and ownership, if we can restate that in a quantifiable way, we can potentially write that in a provable code and formalize that. I think that's roughly the high level of it. And when it comes to patent office, I think we all have this idea, this at least a very broad understanding that patent office is really a backwards practice, but we really don't have something that's much better, especially because it's really a can of worms. But all in all, patent office shows the responsibility of recording and judging whether or not certain inventions are new, novel, and contributing to mankind in different domains, etc. And I just think that the resource that the government dedicated to this particular branch, which is crucial actually to human innovation, does not justify it. And so it's just a very slow process. It's very costly, and also it passively enforces it. Right? It's like the TradFi versus DeFi argument, where the TradFi had all these laws that would punish you, that would threaten to punish you if you do bad. DeFi protocols basically put assertions, and so bad behaviors are just rejected upfront. Right? And patent office basically the same thing. When companies apply patent, they have all these thinking around, I'm going to apply this, but more I know for certainty I will be sued anyways, so I will be going to court. And all these thinking when it comes to, do I have the means to pay for a court battle, all that stuff. As opposed to if we formalize this on in the blockchain way, then I think we have an opportunity to build a formal system where innovations are incentivized upfront in a very proactive way.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really interesting. I think that it does help a lot for things that are computable, things that you can code, things that you can prove that some calculation work. So it works for science. I think it's a bit harder to generalize for, say, the design of a physical engine, right? But still, it is fascinating, and especially because like these problems, computable problems or mathematics or optimizations are also very hard to assess and evaluate by a patent agency.
I think one of the inspirations that I got when it comes to physics simulation is actually SpaceX. I came across these materials that documented how they build entirely from scratch, multi-time scale and also spatial scale physics simulation that allowed them to iterate on their Falcon engine, etc. And it's just crucial for their model. They can't really do field tests without simulating it properly. Every test is very expensive. And so with all these state-of-the-art domains heavily using simulations to aid their design, right? And simulations are pieces of software code. When we can prove that, we can almost decentralize this process of innovation. I think that's where I got my ideas from.
No, you're right, and also this is something that is applicable in the field of medicine, right? We use more and more simulation to simulate the shape of proteins or to design new medicine. And so being able to say, hey, look, I run the first computation that led to that protein, or here's the impact that it could have, how I've simulated it, could also be a great tool for that domain.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that various communities, especially in the decentralized science space, have been pushing these ideas forward. I think one caveat here is whether it's medicine or whether it's space, aerospace engineering, there is a need for high quality field data to be collected, whether from actual experiments or whether from human experience, to be supplied to these simulations to contextualize that. And traditionally, there are companies and organizations, and there are various profit model to justify that cost and to do all the incentive alignment to make this happen. But now we're moving to a new paradigm. So how do we create incentive systems, completely new incentive systems for real data to come in, for these simulators to be built on one side, and solutions that fit those simulators on the other side, and so on. I think these are huge systems to be built.
Yeah, for sure.
Makes space very interesting.
Yeah, but that's what makes it stimulating, right? There's everything that you can build, and you can imagine so much stuff on top of it. So what are you guys doing at Topology every day? Are you working in that specific direction, or?
Well, I think Topology, in one sense, wants to build realities and worlds on a blockchain.
And you're building a simulation.
In a sense, yeah. Perhaps we can talk a little bit about why that is intriguing.
Yeah, for sure.
When in this world, we don't know who God is, and we can't read. If there's smart contract codes that dictate the physics of this world, we don't have access to those contracts. And so it makes the world super deep. We have to invent new ways to explore this world, and then we have to invalidate our earlier hypotheses, and there are revolutions and people getting killed in the process, and worlds evolved, going down and going up, etc. I think it's interesting to be able to build realities on the blockchain, and as opposed to running simulated realities from a game company perspective. Game companies shoulder these investors' expectation in making money, delivering numbers, quarterly, etc. And also, if you're not for public game companies, right? If it's just private game studios, more or less, video games has become a medium for people to find more or less entertainment values. Mm-hmm. And it's something that you do on the side, right? It's something that you have all your life going on, and then you have this hobby of playing wonderful indie games and find satisfaction in them. I think that's very different from the ethos of building worlds on chain. When we build worlds on chain, we intend them to be spaces where people actually live in, and live doesn't mean the meat space transitioning to the cyberspace. We're still tied to the meat space, but live in as in finding the primary source of satisfaction in life in that space. And so, finding ways to express oneself creatively, I think that's all we do in our various different domains. And so I think that's our endeavor, building spaces on chain that has real depth, and that depth can allow for all kinds of creative expressions tailored to people with different talents. And there are just many super hard technical challenges involved. There needs to be depth in the physics, and also there needs to be native support for composability. And we've seen composability work wonder on layer one when it comes to DeFi Lego. I think in general, a lot of NFT projects, game project, etc., in the blockchain space, they have been talking about composability for a very long time, but this really is a very hard problem. And I think that Topology has a chance of solving that because we're very dedicated to it.
Super cool. Yeah, and so having a world where you have depth and where people can explore creatively. And if you add on top of that the fact that, it's a blockchain, so people can move assets, people can communicate with data, but also exchange resources. And so people get to be there and enjoy what they're doing, but also eventually make a living. So, we spend most of our days today, at least in our profession, behind a screen, whether it's behind a screen that is pointed towards a Web2 company or an alternate reality or a simulated world is a different. We kind of already live in a metaverse. We just don't call it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so it gives really the opportunity for people to work on the same shared world and also share resources and get paid for that. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that we can take it a little bit slow on the getting paid side. Monetary incentives can disrupt things, and so I think in the short term we will stay in experimental mode, just focusing on the mechanics that really make it fun and deep.
So in the blockchain space in general, I think I'm not miscategorizing if I say most people are driven by money, right? Not all of them. And usually people who stay around with the harder focus and for the longest time, they're not motivated by money. They're motivated by something else. What is that something else that you guys will give to people? Is it a sense of excitement, being able to work on a shared world and building blocks?
Right. Well, I think that, and I think there are really many layers to this question. And I think it's completely understandable and justifiable that people are drawn to money in the blockchain space. And I think to me, that basically means that there is a huge paradigm shift now in terms of what is scarce in our civilization. And so before blockchain, society, of course, let's exclude the Silicon Valley space. In many countries, in many industries, there is more or less a stale in growth. And that means money is very scarce. Whoever gets hold of capital has this network effect and monopoly. And so that sort of hinders the flow of resource, and that hinders innovation. Right. And so money has been scarcity for a very long time, very long as in millenniums. Right. And I think we're I think some VCs wrote about this before, but I think we're experiencing a transition in what is scarce in our civilization. And one of the things that will happen during this transition is people finding infinitely more ways to make money in this new technology. And over time, it will just become apparent that when money making is not a problem, what is next, right? Because human desire is something that's not satisfiable. It's always seeking the next subject, right? So when money is not scarce, what is scarce? And so it may be something much more wonderful. It may be something that's detrimental, but I think it's up to us, the developers, to shape that.
For sure. And, there's finding the answer, but the process of finding the answer, I think for a lot of people is very stressful. Like finding out, hey, I don't need to eat anymore. What do I do? Is a scary question for a lot of people. So this is really interesting. Simulated worlds, on-chain stuff. And you mentioned that you discovered blockchain through Ethereum, Bitcoin, behind the screen, basically. I'm wondering, at some point, it's really nice reading articles and reading hot takes on Twitter and interesting insights on Reddit. But at some point, it's also nice to meet humans. You mentioned you went in 2020 to East Denver. I'm curious, what were your first meet space, real life interaction with the community, and what was that experience like?
It was great. East Denver 2020 was great. It was right before COVID, so it was great also in that, because of that reason. It was great, particular to me, because the space has felt very energetic to me. And when at East Denver in a meetup in Main Space, I can feel that energy. As in everyone had hope. They're taking challenges. I remember there are projects back in 2020, East Denver 2020, that wanted to build, decentralized Instagram and stuff. That may not make sense. That sounded very skeuomorphic, but still is a huge undertaking. And of course, everyone knows that building network effects from scratch is just super, super difficult. But even if these early social networks have daily active users of a couple dozen or a couple hundred, they're still pushing ahead, and it's a wonderful space to be in, where people just taking challenges and taking huge risks, but they don't see it as risk. They just see it as something necessary and impactful, and they're willing to do it. And so meeting in Mate Space gave me that impression that okay, these are real people with desire and dreams, and they're really dedicated to this.
Super cool. And how, so we mentioned it before, but you're currently building on StarkNet. How would so you've been in various communities, you've been in the Ethereum community. How is the StarkNet community different or similar to the Ethereum community? And do you find this kind of energy? It feels like we have a bunch of people trying to build crazy things on StarkNet. Is it something that is similar to what you were describing?
Yeah, I think one analogy that I've gotten from people that participated in the very early days of Ethereum is that it's similar to the Cairo space at the moment, where there are relatively few developers on the platform. The ideas being worked on are very creative, and people are not really concerned about monetary implications. They're primarily concerned about forging new ways of doing things, pushing forward the boundary of imagination, so to speak. And I heard that was very akin to the Ethereum space in 2015. So that I think that probably answered the question.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. Cool. Listen, I think I have asked most of the interesting questions I had. So I want to thank you for your time and your insights. It's always stimulating discussing with you. So thank you for your time. I don't know if you have an extra comment or point you want to iterate on.
Maybe a little bit about Cairo space, right? Because we just talked about it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think that I think Cairo is an inkling of a new era, so to speak. These are provable computation. These aren't just regular computation. Although it's dressed like a high expressive language that we are kind of familiar with, it's a completely different beast that underlies it. And so I think.
What do you mean? Well, I mean, what do you mean? What is so special about the fact that you can prove a program?
Well, because when you can prove a program, in a sense, you can run it once, and you don't just trust it. You know that it has been run, and the results you can compose, you can build on that result. And I think that completely changed the way the computation means. Previously, computation means mechanizing human thoughts, right? So in human thoughts, there are various things that are logical, that are very susceptible to automation. And so we write computer codes basically formalizing our thoughts into executable programs. And that's executable in our computer architecture. But now we have below that computer architecture, we have a ZKP system. And so that's just not executable code. That's executable and provable code. And I think that's just to me that's really a nonlinear step forward, and we are at just the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah, it's interesting in a way. Computers allow you to execute stuff, but overall, there's no shared memory between computers and processes. So if you need to re-execute something or you need to share something in the computer world in general, you need to re-execute it or you need to share that computation. And with provable system, it's kind of like if all of a sudden computation grew memory or state, because you get to execute it once and you can use that result as a primitive without having to recompute it.
I see.
I mean, I'm not sure if that's what you were saying, or
I think with state we have it on blockchains, right? So I think what you meant was we can have verifiable computation mutating these share states, and that's a wonderful thing to have. I think another observation I can make is that we can look at different industries and how they evolve. More or less, it starts with some new ways of doing things, and then it becomes sophisticated over time, and it becomes an entire vertical where different companies and people specialize in different part of that vertical. And the key to being able to have like a vertical industry is people are producing something that gets consumed by the next producer along the pipeline. And whenever there's this producer-consumer relationship, right, there needs to be some standard, some compliance. As in, you deliver goods to me. In order for me to add value to it, I need to know that whatever you supply to me meets certain spec or a certain qualification. And so there's a lot of compliance in these complex industries, where whenever there is a transition from company to company along the pipeline, there's some kind of compliance going on, right? And so, like with verifiable computation, it's almost like the compliance is automatic.
Yep.
And that basically means that we can build very complex industries, different parts specializing in different things, and the link between them, the compliance is auto-enforced.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How do you see the interaction of Cairo and StarkNet? Because, there's Cairo and then there's StarkNet. And I know you focus a lot on writing Cairo for StarkNet, but you're talking here about Cairo more generally. How do you see the interaction and complementarity between both?
Well, so I think Cairo implies a virtual machine, and StarkNet implies an operating system. To me, it has been much more interesting to write Cairo contracts that are deployable on StarkNet. Of course, that's a little bit under the whim of Starkware, the company, to decide what can be deployed, what cannot be deployed when it comes to whitelisting stuff, in a sense. But still,
I think it is for now. It won't be for forever.
Yeah, I understand. So at least in the short term, it's still a wonderful experience. Being able to write provable code and put it on StarkNet, and that it exists on this abstracted away infrastructure. Everyone in the world can access it. It's a wonderful experience. The way I think about it is, Cairo is a virtual machine. And so digging deep into it really requires understanding of the underlying Stark system, right? And as opposed to thinking deeper about StarkNet really goes into what makes an operating system work. And in this case, it's much more challenging. It's a decentralized operating system. I think these are different domains, but they're very intertwined.
Very insightful. Thank you. Great.
Great.
If you have more additions, don't hesitate.
This is good. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let's wrap it up. Thank you a lot for your time today and your insights. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope our auditors will too. Where can we find you? What should people who think, this is interesting, where should they click to have more insights on what you are doing or building?
Right. Well, people can find me on Twitter. That will be the most straightforward way. I'm GuiltyGyoza on Twitter. So,
wonderful.
Yeah, Gyoza with the Y. Yeah.
Perfect. We'll put the link in the description. Okay, so GuiltyGyoza, thank you for your time, and until next time.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. Take care.